Azure Cloud Events. I'll show you that. I have a link up. Oh gosh, there we go. Again, I'm Tim McAlilly, Timothy McAlilly, Tim, whatever. Senior Cloud Solution Architect here at Microsoft, specialized in SQL Server, Azure Data Services, and Power BI. And I've got 24 years in IT and 11 years in Microsoft, and I've been with the user group since 2013. I'm going to continue to stay with the user group, but I'm going to hand over the reins to somebody else to control the user group and run the dates and coordinate speakers and all of that stuff. I'm just kind of out of it, but I'll still speak at user group events for occasionally, and then I'll also still run specific community events. I'll show you here in just a second. One second. Let me go here and that. Okay. So for the SQL Server 22 workshop, there's all kind of resources, right? You can get out there. Excuse me, let me go here. You can get out there and leverage the links the product groups provided. You can go and go out to training. You can download a copy of SQL Server 22. You can download the deck that we'll talk about today. I added some of my own slides, so some of the stuff, the content won't be available, but you can watch the recording. There's some documentation, what's new for SQL Server 22. There's demos you can try. There's Microsoft Mechanics videos you can try. There's Data Exposed. There's a whole YouTube series. There's a YouTube series covering today, what we're going to talk about today. There's a SQL Server 22 blog, and there's all kinds of learning you can take for free in addition to sitting in on community events like this particular workshop. Side note, at the top corner there, you see aka.ms SQL workshop. That links out to a GitHub site that we'll go to and take a look at. Goals for this workshop. We just want you to, have fun. You want you to be able to provide an interactive foundation for you to learn SQL Server. You want to think about why you want to upgrade to SQL Server 22. Talk about specific key features that work in SQL Server 22. And that's what we've done for this meetup, for this workshop. We've gone in and made sure that we've broken the workshop into, user group based sessions and delivered the full workshop over the course of a year. So this is the last workshop that we're delivering them, and get some hands-on experience and walk away with resources. Again, we started back in February and going up till this month, October. We started out with an introduction to SQL Server 22, a couple of months of work on connectivity to Azure. We covered accelerating your performance with built-in query intelligence. We talked about powering your database with security, scalability, and availability for a couple of months. Last month, we talked about accessing new sources with data virtualization and object storage, and query that data in place, not having to move that data around. And then today, we're going to talk about enhancing our application with new SQL capabilities. We had reserved November 17th for kind of a Q&A update kind of session, but I was able to get Alex Powers, a senior program manager from the Microsoft Power BI CAT team, customer advisory team, or the Fabric customer advisory team, excuse me. He's going to come in and talk to us about Microsoft Fabric, which because Fabric touches Data Lake, it touches SQL Server, it touches data marts, it touches pipelines, it touches Power BI. You'll want to attend the Fabric conversation, especially if you don't know much about Fabric. There's some more events coming up in 2024. We got the rooms reserved for January 18th and 19th. We have another OpenAI ChatGPT event in Reston. It's going to be a 2-day event. I'll be there for that first day, January 18th. I've got a kind of a customer, not a workshop, but like a customer kind of event. So I'll be popping in and out on the 18th, but I'll be there in full on the 19th. I'll greet visitors on the 18th, and I'll check things out on the 18th. But anyway, 18th and 19th in person in Reston in the new Microsoft offices at I guess it's Freedom Boulevard, or we'll have we'll just keep an eye out for the URL. We'll have it out shortly. We're working on it. Again, we just got the dates registered. We got the rooms reserved. So we haven't put out tickets or posted it on Meetup yet, but we will. Meetup notifications coming and URL to register for the January 18th and 19th event and the June 7th event. That'll come up. In June 7th, we're doing a Microsoft Power BI, Microsoft Fabric co-pilot event. and that's an in-person event as well. Same spot in Reston. Both of these events are about seats 130 people. And then I'm sure that the new leadership for the user group or for the meetup will want to do some kind of meetups with a mix of virtual and in-person leadership. And then the new leader is AJ Galopoli, and he's a great guy that you'll really get a good have a good time with. Who goes very deep on a lot of topics. He's a former Microsoft employee, and he works for Informatica right now. The resources and slides for all the meetup sessions. We put them on the GitHub site. We'll go out and take a look. And then all the links, not all the links, but all the recordings, we're going to put those in aka.ms Azure Cloud Events. If you go out here to our trusty dusty link site here, and you can see there is a GitHub site for this workshop that I'm delivering to you right now. And you can go in and take a look at the workshop and download updated slides for they were updated last month. And there's a subdirectory inside the workshop for each of the topics we've covered: connecting to Azure, built-in query intelligence, improvement to the data engine, virtualization, and today's topic on T-SQL. So you'll want to go and have a relationship with this directory so you know about it and can interact with it and know about the content. I'm going to kind of go back to the T-SQL piece because we're going to be jumping into that here in just a moment. Every one of these subdirectories has a list of exercises, and then there's information here for scripts and things like that you might need. Also, you can go and look at, there's a, what's new in SQL Server 22 and get, documentation about SQL Server 22 and dig through that. Or you can look at commercial, just general information about SQL Server 22, or you can look at the YouTube channel on SQL Server. All these the links are in the slides. There's a YouTube playlist that's built around data exposed on SQL Server 22 and Microsoft Mechanics with, Bob Ward being the lead speaker. Or you can go to our Azure Cloud Events normal website, or you can go to the Azure Cloud Events YouTube channel, and all of our meetings are here, and there's a playlist for this particular, there's a playlist for the workshop. I don't want to play it, sorry. But you can see all the events that we did for SQL Server 22. They're right there in the playlist. So you want to go and visit that and check it out. Let me go here, go back to our slide deck. Sorry, that was kind of clumsy. I do deal with PowerPoint every day. Let me go back to our taskbar. Let me fight with Teams a little bit. And let me kind of turn my camera off. I'll turn my camera on back at maybe toward the tail end. Yeah. All right, so all the links for all the resources are on these slides, except for aka.ms Azure Cloud Events. That's our YouTube channel, and we post the recordings onto YouTube. Also, if you want to dig in deeper, you can pick up Bob Ward's book, SQL Server 22, with a foreword by Rohan Kumar. It's a really good book. I bought it when it was in its first edition. I have the Kindle version. Super good book. It covers all the chapters that all the modules for the workshop. It follows that pretty much exactly. The workshop itself, it was broken down into these chapters or modules. Module 1, we talked about an introduction to SQL Server 22. Module 2, we talked about connecting SQL Server 22 to Azure, accelerating performance with built-in query intelligence for Module 3, power of your database with security, scalability, and availability, accessing new storage with data virtualization and object storage. And then today we're going to talk about JSON, new T-SQL, and time series type T-SQL capabilities that have been expanded. And if you need to go, and again, a link for the workshop and the link for the YouTube and the link for the SQL Server 22 demos is all out there for you to go check out. And again, if you recall, side note, I know I do these slides. If you're new to the meetup, I do these slides again as sort of an introductory. So there's a few slides here we're going to cover about introducing SQL Server 22 before we get into the meat of it. Again, with Server 22, starting with really SQL Server 2016, where 2016 introduced the query store and the ability to have external data storage, external tables with polybase and always encrypted and row level security, and it just running faster, engine improvements and improvements to what you can leverage with just the standard edition of SQL Server. And then SQL Server 2017, the big thing there was SQL Server being able to deploy on Linux and to be able to run in containers. And then SQL Server 2019, more improvements to data virtualization, more improvements to intelligent query processing, accelerated data recovery to help things like transmitting logs for all within and always on availability groups and your recovery operations, and then data classification. And then with SQL Server broadly, we wanted to make sure it was a familiar interface with common tools that was flexible to cover things all the way from the edge of the network on IoT devices on Azure SQL Edge to SQL Server 22 to running the Azure Arc enabled with the Arc extension, the Azure Arc extension running on SQL Server 22 or on managed instance, or SQL Server running on a virtual machine with the Azure IaaS agent extension running on it, or an Azure SQL database, where ideally your development work all kind of ports from node to node without any weird transformational type activities. And then with SQL Server 22, again, we're trying to do these hero capabilities around Azure, around around query performance improvements, and there's these hero capabilities around the link feature for managed instance, connecting your SQL Server 22 node to an Azure SQL managed instance node for a always on availability group to fail over to that managed instance node and to fail back if you need to, or to be able to restore, to back up from that managed instance node and restore onto your SQL Server 22 node, to link out into your Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pool architecture, to drop data off on blob storage on a landing zone, to have that scooped up by the Azure SQL or Azure Synapse SQL pool, then to be read by analytical tools like Power BI, and then to have Microsoft Purview integrating both in terms of crawling your data and mapping out the schema, mapping out the data owners, but also creating policies, enforcing policies, running insights, looking at lineage at the data level on the source and what transformations occurred, and then what are the destinations for some of that data. And then Ledger for SQL Server, having based on blockchain technology, where you've got an immutable record of storage that is there, that's outside of the SQL Server storage footprint, where you can allow auditors to verify transactions, to verify edits to the table. And then, built-in query intelligence that we talked about a couple of months ago. And again, this runs across the Oracle SQL Edge, the Azure SQL Edge, Azure Arc enabled data services, and the Azure SQL database. And then the SQL Server 22 capabilities. We wanted to, again, improve that connectivity to the cloud, leverage built-in query intelligence, leverage security and scalability, leverage data virtualization, object storage. And today we're going to talk about extending T-SQL with JSON capabilities and time series capabilities, and some specific capabilities in T-SQL itself. All right, so now let's jump into enhancing your application with new T-SQL capabilities. What we'll do is we'll go through the slide and then we'll look at the lab exercises and show you the scripts and show the actual T-SQL that's being shown. So again, with the new T-SQL enhancements, maybe a developer saying, I want to get new features without having to learn a new language. I'm a T-SQL developer. So we have new JSON capabilities. We have isJSON, JSON path exists, JSON object, JSON array. We have new T-SQL capabilities, greatest, least, string split, all the way down to get bit and set bit. And then time series, date bucket, generate series, first and last value. And then for the JSON enhancements, I think I'll do per section, and then I'll go to look to, I'll go section and then go to the script, section and go to the script. So for the JSON enhancement, is JSON path exist, JSON object, JSON array. And I've got a definition and an example for each one of these. So what your JSON does, and again, you don't have these slides available to download, but they're being recorded here. So it's a function in Transact SQL that's going to test whether a string contains valid JSON. And it's going to take an expression as an argument, which is the string to test, and has an optional argument, JSON type constraint, which will specifies the JSON type to check in the input. And then valid values in the argument are value, array, object, or scalar. And then here's an example of the is JSON function. So select is JSON, and you're passing it in name, John, age, the city, and then is as JSON. So in this example, the is JSON function is going to be used to check whether that input string is going to contain valid syntax. And the function returns 1, indicating the input string is valid, right? The is JSON is saying, hey, is this valid JSON? And you can see it is JSON. Then the JSON path exists function tests whether a specified SQL or JSON path exists in your input string. And it'll bring in value expression and then the path, and to determine if it's a valid JSON path to test that input. And it'll return a bit value of 1 or 0 or null. If it returns null, or it'll return null if the value expression or the input is a SQL null value. And it returns 1 if the path does exist in the input or a non-empty sequence. Otherwise, it'll return 0. And here's an example of the syntax of JSON path exists. It's making sure that path is a valid path. And this example here is going to return 1 since the JSON string contains the specified SQL JSON path. Oh, sorry. And then the JSON underscore object, and what this does, it constructs a JSON object from SQL data, ANSI compliant. And by the way, all these enhancements, what you're trying to do is make sure that as T-SQL enhancements come from SQL Server 22, that they're ANSI compliant, that you can, be a SQL developer and understand ANSI compliance, and then not have to worry about something specific to, SQL Server T-SQL. So JSON object is a function in T-SQL that constructs a JSON object from SQL data. It's ANSI compatible. It's an ANSI compatible JSON value constructor. And the example here is select JSON object, name, value type 1. In this example, return a JSON object with 2 different keys. Then JSON array is a function in T-SQL that will construct a JSON array from 0 or more expressions. It takes 1 or more JSON array arguments, which are expressions that help define the value of that element in a JSON array. There's also an optional JSON null clause argument, which can be used to control the behavior of a JSON array. I wrote these slides, so yeah, I'm reading because I wrote it. I don't have any other, very little, let me work around, let me paraphrase what I wrote. Then there's an option null on null that converts that SQL null value into a JSON null value when the generating value of the element when generating the value of the element JSON array. So the example is select JSON array, and this will return an array of 4 elements, right? And the elements you're passing it are A, 1, B, 2. And then for T-SQL enhancements, sorry about that. You know what I was going to do? Let's go out and look at the labs for these. I won't do the labs, but we'll take a look. So we'll take a look at JSON, and you can see what the exercises are. And go and look at the T-SQL. And you can see you've got, you're setting a JSON array. You're showing a simple JSON array, then creating a table based on a JSON array. Then doing a select from it. And then using isJSON to test if the JSON data exists. And then you can actually drop the table. And you can see there's a JSON object. So we'll see how the JSON object and object path functions work. So use master. Oh, sorry about that. Selecting from your JSON object into SQL request JSON object. And then select JSON path exists. That's what that code looks like. And now let me go back to the slideware. I just have a couple of examples of these because I don't want to get into a whole, because there's so many more. But you've got greatest, least, string split, trim functions, date trunk is not distinct from Windows clause, left shift, right shift, bit count, get bit, and set bit. We have some examples here for greatest and least, right? The greatest function returns a maximum value from a list, and then the least function returns a minimum value from a list, right? So, for example, here, to get the greatest and the least value from a list, you can go, here's an example, select greatest, 1, 2, 3 as the greatest, and then least, 1, 2, 3 as the least, and it'll return the greatest, the 3 greatest, and 1 as the least value. And then there's some other functions. There's date trunk. It's a new function in SQL Server that will return an input date truncated to a specified date part 1. It returns a truncated date of the same data type, and if applicable, the same fractional time scale as the input date. The syntax is date trunk and then the date part and the date. And then the example is select date trunk and then pass it the year and it'll truncate. That will make that 2017-01-01 and then give you kind of a timestamp. Let me go and look at the examples of the T-SQL enhancements. They kind of do get we'll show you. Let's see. No, that's not a good example. Packet bits. Yeah, you can do things like use master declare tiny int. Yeah, this is not a good. I apologize for that. The exercises all run well, but the surface area. Okay, there we go. T-SQL. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So you see date trunk here. So you want to truncate just the year from a date with a variable. You can truncate the hour from a granular date time. You can truncate to the day of the year. You can even truncate down to the quarter, right? You're going to pass it date trunk and then pass it the quarter and then the date. And then you can look at Windows SQL, right? You can see select without the window clause, but with the window clause, maybe you've got a range, a window of data that you're looking for based on the values you're passing it in. Maybe you're putting it in some kind of specific sliding value, some window around that. And then there is a trim SQL function. Select trim and then use the extension for the L trim, the new extension. And then you can do the right trim or the R trim function. And then you can go in and do, we did the greatest and least. We saw that one. We'll go back to the slides. So for time series data, got date bucket, generate series, first value, and last value. A date bucket, again, it's a function in T-SQL that'll return the latest date and time, the latest date or time value corresponding to the date part and that numerical parameter. And that function takes 4 arguments: date part, the number, the date, and an optional origin. And the date part is the part of the date that's used with the numeric parameter. And the number is an integer that decides the width of the bucket combined with the date part argument. And you can see an example here where the date bucket returns the latest date or time value corresponding to the date part and number parameter. So you can have the declare at date and then have it be date time, and then select date bucket and then the week and then the numerical value, and then you're pulling in this variable, this at date piece. And then generate series. Generate series, a function in T-SQL generates a series of numbers within a given interval. Interval and the step between the series values are defined by the user, and the function takes 3 arguments: a start, a stop, and an optional step. Start's the first value in the interval, and stop is the last value in the interval. And the series stops once that last generated step value exceeds the stop value. And this step argument indicates the number of values to increment or decrement between the steps in the series. It can be either negative or positive, but it can't be 0. And this function, this generates a series of values, of integer values between 1 and 0. You have a start, which is 1, a stop, which is 10, and increments of 1. And that'll generate integer values between 1 and 10. Oh, sorry about that. Then you have, for time series, you have first value, and that's a function in T-SQL that return the first value in an ordered set of values. It's an analytical function that can be used in SQL. It takes in a scalar expression, which is the value that gets returned, and a scalar expression can be a column, a subquery, or other expression that results in a single value. And that function also has an option over clause that specifies the partitioning and ordering of the data. Let me make sure you can see that. So you've got an example here: select name, price list, first value, name, right? It's returning that first value in an ordered set of values. So order by least expensive. So this example here would help return that first value, to return name in terms of the it would return, sorry about that, it would return the first value in an ordered set of values. And then last value, it's a function in T-SQL that will return the last value in an ordered set. Same thing as first value does, but the last value, and again, you can see with the example of last value, and this example is returning the hire date of the last employee in each department for a given salary. It's get by, by salary rate. So hire date, and it's sorting it by salary. So what the last value is, I want it to be hire date for this return. Let's take a look at the queries in the lab. Go here, T-SQL time series, and we'll just take a look at a couple. We'll look at date bucket. So we're going to calculate the date bucket with the width of 1. So we got the value of 1, and then we're going to use date instead of date time for step 2, and then we're going to generate a fixed bucket sizes, right? Fixed bucket, which means we've set the bucket right, 5-minute buckets, and then set another bucket for quarter hour bucket. Then another one here, generate series. We're generating a series of values between 1 and 100, and 1 and 100 with a 0.5, and then decimal values. You can generate a series of decimal base values. Gap filling. All right. So which T-SQL function can produce JSON formatted data, right? That's your JSON object and your JSON array. And which important T-SQL enhancement, or which important enhancement was added we didn't cover this, string split function in SQL Server, and that's ordinal. We did not cover that. So we just kind of cruised through this. We talked about the enhancements in T-SQL. We talked about enhancements to process JSON. We talked about the effort to make sure it's ANSI compatible. And we also talked briefly about some new T-SQL time functions. I know we didn't really spend too much time overall in the user group meeting today, but I think we're at a point where we can go ahead and wrap. Are there any questions? That kind of does it for our SQL Server 22 series. Do we have any questions about this or anything else that's in SQL Server 22? We're going to wrap up early. All righty. I'm going to stop the recording and farewell to everybody. Not farewell, but everybody. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving if you don't attend our November meeting. Remember, our November meeting is here, and we'll have Alex Powers here for our November meeting, and we'll talk about Microsoft Fabric. So if you got questions about Microsoft Fabric, oh, sorry about that. Microsoft Fabric, you'll want to attend this meeting. I think it's going to be co-presented with Power BI DC. It should be on their meetup site too. It will be in the next couple of days. And then we'll also have tickets for the January 18th, 19th event and the June 7th event over the next week. All right, everybody. Thanks for a great year of SQL Server 22 workshop information, and thanks for attending. And I'll stop the recording.